Dobry wieczór. Was it good? How are you? Was it a long day? Good. So I'm really glad to be here. I love Poland, and I haven't been to Poland in the last 10 years, but I'm back, and I'm really glad that I can share my thoughts with you today evening. As you have heard, probably I'm most known about SpecFlow and the things that I'm doing in BDD. This talk will talk a little bit of side part of that, which is the UI automation. But I hope I can share you some interesting details about that. So, yeah, as you have heard, I work generally as a trainer, coach, and of course I keep maintaining SpecFlow as well. Sometimes I like to call myself as a BDD addict. I'm really interested to hear about any interesting news and post articles about BDD. And since I'm more or less collecting these interesting articles, at some point I decided that why not share these articles with others. So basically I started to make a newsletter. You can also subscribe to that, it's all free. You can go to the bddaddict.com and you will find all the details. And basically what I'm doing there, I'm sharing the interesting articles in every month that I read about BDD, SpecFlow, Cucumber, test automation, and whatsoever. Okay, so, but today we will talk about UI automation, and UI automation has problems. So probably you all know that typically UI automated tests are brittle, they are slow, and actually whenever I say to other BDD addicts that I'm going to talk about UI automation in a conference, they say that, this is strange, because typically in BDD we say that UI automation is a dangerous part. Actually, if your project is only automated through the UI, then it's really very hard to make an efficient test automation, build up an efficient test automation and have that feeling that your application is covered and you get a fast feedback. So let's say that my disclaimer is that you are somewhere here on the top of the testing pyramid, so that you also have other tests as well, which can give you some fast feedback and where you can really verify your behavior in a fast manner. And I think if you have heard the talk of Aslak in the morning, then he was talking quite much of that. But still, even in this case, making UI automated tests is very important, because this is the only way that you can really verify that whatever your users see, that you can automatically test, which would be essential for something like a continuous delivery process. Okay, so how many of you have ever did or doing UI automation? So, good, so many of us have that. So let me just try to share some experience or some thoughts that I have collected by doing UI automation and also visiting many companies who are doing the same. And I would like to show this through an example. And for that example, I've just picked or actually implemented a very simple web application. It's really much looks like the Stack Overflow. You can have some questions, and basically you can see some votes in there. The only difference is that this one is called Stack Overflow. And yeah, so let's say that this is an example of a decent website that you, or in your projects, you also develop. However, if you look at the automated tests of such applications, then you probably will see something like this. And I hope that you will not be able to read this, because this is so ugly and so hard to maintain. Okay, so who has ever seen a test like that? No one, okay, that's fine. So, so I also see this time to time, and whenever I survive after the first shock, then actually, if you go into the details of these tests and try to analyze them, then you will realize that there are some typical patterns that you can, typical bad patterns that these tests are suffering from. And let me just collect 5 of these typical patterns that I typically see. So one thing which is very common for these tests is they have an unclear purpose. What do I mean on that? So that typically if you have such tests, as long as they are passing, everyone is happy. But whenever they start to fail, and you can be sure that these tests will start to fail sooner or later, then everybody is, it's a quite bad situation because you don't know actually what exactly I wanted to test with this test. So it's a long code. It usually doesn't have any very descriptive title. Sometimes it can be called like test 1, 2, 3, 4. In my case, this is called like question test or something like that, very generic name. And even in the code, there is a big spaghetti code. You don't really get the point what you actually wanted to test with that. So whenever it fails, it's hard to see whether now the test is wrong or the application has a bug. Or maybe something has changed in the application. So they don't have a clear purpose. The second thing that you might see is a kind of code application, copy-paste programming or any other ways of code application. I think this is pretty clear to everyone. And of course, if you have code application, this means that you have more code to maintain. And generally what we want to have in our projects and also in our test automation, that if there is a small change in the application, we also want to have a small change in the testing code base, right? However, if you have copy-pasted everything, then if there is a small change in the way how the application represents the things in the UI, you have to change it in many different places. So code application is really bad for maintenance. The third one, which I call anti-semantic locators. Locators are those expressions that you can use to find the different elements on the page. And anti-semantic might mean that they don't have a real meaning. I will go more into detail to that. The fourth one is a little bit more tricky, but actually what you can also see in these code bases is that sometimes they are addressing or they are automating the different elements of the page in the wrong abstraction level. Sometimes they are just going too low level and trying to automate the things in a too level ways. I will go more detailed into that. What do I mean on that, and what kind of things you can imagine to make this better. And of course, last but not least, the infamous timing issues. I think all of us have seen these. So, which is also very typical in these kind of applications. So now what I would like to do, I would like to share some ideas for all 5 of these things, and I was trying to have a common theme on these approaches or on these ideas that I will share to you. And finally, I was just trying to find a fancy name for that, and this is how I got to this behavior-driven UI automation. But I'm really bad in finding good names, so probably this name will never be famous. But actually, the concept behind this is what is important. And the concept behind this is that sometimes you just need to automate the things like your users see that. This sounds quite obvious, and this sounds like a common sense, but I will show you in practice how this can be seen. Okay, so let's go through these 5 things. And actually, I mean, talking through all the 5 would take a lot of time. Right now, I will do it in a way that the first 2 I will just mention quickly, and I will go more into detail on the other 3. So I will not spend much time on these first 2. So let's start with the unclear purpose. And unclear purpose, as we said, means that actually we have a test, but it's hard to see what this test is supposed to do, why we have added this test to our code base, and what the different lines in this test are actually doing. And if you have heard about behavior-driven development, and I have seen that in the program there were many talks, and probably you anyway have a much background about that, then you know that behavior-driven development can be also a kind of support for that. Maybe you didn't think about BDD like this, but if you think about BDD in a way that in BDD we are expressing the expected behavior with Gherkin scenarios, with these given when then based scenarios, and actually these the Gherkin scenarios are basically covering the meaning. So what did we expect from the website or from the application? So here you can probably see that the question should appear and the last in the list. And this is having a when step, that when I ask a question, then something happens. So basically, this is describing what I wanted to do with this test and what I wanted to check with this test. And so basically, whenever this test is failing, then I already have a better idea what I wanted to achieve with this. But it goes even more into the details, because actually whenever you this cucumber style BDD, then the automation code is also structured a little bit, because you don't just make a very big method which is providing the automation code base for the entire test, but you are just providing the automation code blocks for the individual steps. So for me right now, I have a step definition for my when step, I have a step definition for the then step. Still, the when step is pretty long, but it's already much smaller than the entire test was. So we have a little bit more structure in our code base. The purpose of the different automation steps becomes a little bit more clear. Okay, the other easy thing is the code application. I mean, it's not easy, but probably you have some idea what is the standard solution for solving the code application. It's usually the page objects, right? So whenever we want to just have some layering, have some structure in our test automation or UR test automation code base, typically we introduce page objects. And page objects are basically providing us an abstraction of a page, which is encapsulating all the details that we have to know about the different pages. So, for example, how to access the different elements on the page. And instead of duplicating them in the automation code base, we have it in one place. Okay, so I think all of you have heard about page objects, so I don't have to explain it in detail. But generally, the concept of the page object is that we are having a class in our code base which is representing the structure of our page. So if we have this ask page that you see, then whenever you see, for example, a text box in this page, in our case, the title text box, then there is a property in the page which is representing that. If you have a bigger text area for that, then we have a property for that. And for example, if you have a submit button, then we have a submit button related element of that. So this is typically how page objects look like. And in my case, this is now written in C# and using the page object factory or page object library, which is bundled together with the Selenium WebDriver. But I mean, all of the page object frameworks are more or less working in the same way. In many cases, code application and page objects are just that. So you are making classes and you are exposing the different elements of your UI on that page object. But for really getting rid of all the code application, you can also encapsulate interaction with that page and also put it into the page object. So just knowing that, okay, this page has a title text box and a submit button is not enough, because you probably have the same interaction again and again with this form, and still duplicating it into the testing code base would not be really useful. Okay, so page objects are typically a good solution for removing the code application. So let's go to the other parts, the ones which I want to detail a little bit more. So first one is which I called the anti-semantic locators. So actually we are living in the HTML5 world, right? And sometimes HTML5 says that this is the semantic web. Semantic web means that now we don't have just an HTML which is having divs and spans, but all this HTML structure has some meaning. This is required for the search engines and many other things, right? So if we are living in a semantic web, then actually the way how we are locating those buttons and text boxes that we would like to interact with should also have a semantic meaning. And of course, you can see that div4/div/div, this has no semantic meaning. This is just an arbitrary structure in the page, right? If you have these, then you are just losing some, that this thing will break sooner or later, because your web page will change and there will be a new div introduced around the things. And actually what I see is that we would like to automate the things how our users are seeing that. And if you just think about that our users are able to find those text boxes on our page. If they are able to find those text boxes on our page, then we should be also able to find those text boxes on the page if we are doing the test automation. So this is, sometimes we are really struggling a lot to figure out what should be the exact XPath to find a specific button. But this is just because we don't think with through the eyes of the user. So just think about how your users are finding these things. And of course, many people said to that, yeah, let's use IDs everywhere. Let's make an ID of every element. But ID is just not enough, at least not necessarily enough, right? So in this case, you see some color picker, and each color box has an ID, but that ID has no semantic meaning at all. This is just a GUID, right? So this is not yet what we want. What we actually want is that actually we are solving some business problem, and this business problem is having some modeling aspect of that. And actually what we would like to have is that the model that is described, where our business problem is described, should go through across the entire implementation. So in my case, let's say that during the business discussions of this Q&A website, we decided that this short heading of the question should be called title. Okay, it's not label, it's not caption, it's not name. We decided that it's called title. And since we have decided on that, and we wanted to have consistency in our application, whenever we have this field in the database, that the field name is also called title. Whenever we have a class related to the question is have a title property. And of course, whenever we have a text box where you can enter the title, is also called title. Okay, so it's not just an arbitrary ID anymore, but it has a semantic meaning. And of course, if you have a semantic meaning, you can apply some interesting things as well. So, for example, here what you can see is that that since the ID is called title and the property is called title, I didn't even have to express this in the annotation of the page object. So you can make some further simplifications. But just having a semantic ID is also not necessarily enough. So just look at this example. So here we have a t-shirt fabric selector. And it looked like that we have an ID called fabric_input, which sounds like a semantic thing, right? So this is a fabric that we wanted to select. However, if you look into the page, then actually you will realize that this is not a real drop-down. This is not an HTML drop-down, but this is an HTML drop-down which was generated by some Kendo UI library. And actually it has a fabric input, but this is just the end of the story here. Actually, what the real control looks like is a composition of multiple different controls. And actually, we have a fabric selector, but this fabric selector is composed of a fabric input, which is the text box. It has a fabric open, which is just opening the dropdown. It can also have a fabric_list, which is the list you have. Just by saying fabric_input into my automation code base, basically I have expressed the internal behavior of this Kendo UI control. So whenever I would replace it from Kendo UIs to some other control library, all of these codes would start to break. So you have to be careful not to expose any internals of the controls. And of course, locator semantics can be sometimes even contextual. So just look at this example. So here, our button is found by a CSS class which is called btn_default. This means the default button. This is a semantic meaning, right? However, this is only true if we have one form in the page. And maybe today we have only one form in the page, but on the next month there will be another form also in the page. And from now on, this semantic meaning will not have enough context to be able to succeed. So sometimes these semantic locators also having a context. So we really want to find the way how our users are finding our things. And for that, I have a story that I had a couple of years ago. So actually, the story was that we had to make some maintenance on an existing old legacy application. And this existing old legacy application was actually, from the look and feel, it was looking quite nice and it was quite consistent from the UI perspective. But from the implementation point of view, this was quite ugly. So it was not really using nice HTML controls and divs and whatever. Everything was in an HTML table. So all the layouts were solved by HTML tables, and there were no nice IDs and so on. So and we decided that we want to make some test coverage for that. And we first look at that, it looked like a mission impossible. So we just realized that these things have no proper ID. It's nearly impossible to find each individual element, and it would take ages to be able to automate even a single form. However, after having some discussions, we just realized that, well, the HTML that we have is ugly. On the other hand, the page is looking good, and our users are able to use that. So let's just think about how our users are able to find these controls. And actually, we have realized that it's pretty easy, because how our users are finding the controls is that they are just seeing a label, and basically they are just looking to the control which is next to the label. And this is the control which is belonging to that purpose which was described there. And of course, this is something that you can also expose in whatever with a XPath. It's a very complex XPath, because you just have to find the label, go back one level, find the next cell, go up to the control and find it. So repeating it everywhere in the code would really be a disaster. However, we just have seen that this is a common pattern that is existing in our application everywhere. So why don't just declare it as a strategy? And actually, almost all of the page object factories or page object libraries that you can use, and for example, the one which is included in Selenium, this is like that you can extend the location strategies. So by default, you have location strategies like location by ID, location by CSS class, but you can define your own location strategy as well. And if you have a consistent location strategy within your application, you can just decide it, you can just implement it once. We have implemented a location strategy called table field locator. And then whenever we just needed to expose a control in this form, we just had to say that, yeah, just find it by this special location strategy. We had to implement this complex, ugly location strategy only once. And whenever we just needed to use it in all of the forms in the application, basically we just had to mention that this is the location strategy that has to be used. Okay, so this is also, and finally we were able to automate the entire application quite quickly, even though that the HTML was quite ugly, just because we were able to really look at it just like how our users are looking into that. But actually, you don't have to stop here. So probably you can realize that in your application, there are a few location strategies that are in place. So maybe you are generally locating the controls by ID, you are generally locating the buttons by CSS class, you are generally locating, and maybe there are a few more location strategies, but it's like maximum 5 in a decent application. So why do we have to say at all which location strategy has to be used for each individual field? And also the page object factories or page object libraries that you are using are allowing things like that you can just describe the automation, the location strategy in your application. And I mean, the code is maybe a little bit more complex, but what is interesting is that 3 lines there, that basically in that 3 lines, I was just deciding that what are those location strategies in a priority list that are used in my application. And whenever I have to declare any kind of field, I don't have to annotate it at all. I just say that the username is a username property. And then the Selenium page object factory will check the location strategies that I have provided there, and then just find the first one which is matching to that. So if I have this, and so then I was able to remove all this annotation, this ugly annotation from my pages, and from now on, my page objects are looking really clean and looking really. And they are very easy to maintain afterwards. It's a kind of, once you reach this level, so then it will be very productive, very easy to add more and more test automation to your code base. So it's a kind of testing nirvana that you can get to with that. But for that, you have to really investigate what kind of strategies are used in your application. Good. Wrong abstraction. What I'm talking about is this one. So probably you have seen such code. So whenever you want to enter some text into a text box, first you have to clear it, and then you have to call send keys, because send keys would just append the value next to the end of the text box, and if there was already some value in the text box, then this wouldn't be the result that you wanted to have. So if you see such code, and even if you are applying page object pattern, this would still like that. So if you see such code, this is a sign of that we are not really automating the things in the right abstraction level. Think about how our users are working with our website. Our users are not thinking in HTML controls. They hopefully don't even know what an HTML control is. Okay? But the question is then, okay, then what our users are seeing in our page, and it's very hard to say. So how our users are interacting with our applications? What are the things that they are seeing? Some people say that they are seeing controls, but control is also just a solution. They don't see controls, they see something else. This something else having no better name, I usually call it a UI concept. Actually, our applications are built up from different UI concepts. And concept is something, a generalization of some behavior and many different aspects of a thing. Let me show you a concrete example, and then you will see. So let's say that our users are looking into this page, and they don't know anything about HTML, and probably they don't know too much about our website even. So what do they see there? They see somehow a number with a gray box, and there is a small label under that. So they think that, this looks like a counter, right? And they see a small box there with a frame around, and it's just very thin. And they think that, okay, this is probably something where I can enter a short text, right? They don't know whether it's a text box or however it's called. It's a short text where I can enter something, a short text. And they see some circles under each other. They think that, oh, this is something where I can choose one element. And so on. They can probably see the big box. They think that, oh, here I can probably put multiple lines. And they see a button in the end of the form. They think that this is not just a button. This is the button which will probably save the form. Okay, this is how your users are seeing your website, and if your website is consistent, they can use your website even without learning or reading the user's guide, right? So this is what we would need to model also in our application or also in our automation. So if you would like to find these UI concepts, then we would do the same thing. So probably here we would see a counter concept, which is currently implemented with divs and spans. Here we would see like a short text entering concept, which is currently implemented with an input type equals text. Here we see a multi-line text entering concept, which is maybe implemented with the text area, or maybe it's just a div. We don't know that, but we don't care. But users are interacting in the same way with that. And maybe here we have a single choice concept, which is maybe implemented even with multiple elements, multiple input radio stuff. And here we see not only a button, but it's a submitting concept. Okay, so this is what we can see whenever we are seeing our website with the eyes of the user, and this is what we can also apply in our automation code base. And what you can also see here that these concepts are project specific. So maybe in this application there is a counter concept, but maybe in your application there is no counter concept, but there is something else. If you would implement the page object with these concepts, then your page object would look like that. So it would have a title property, but the title property of that would be like a text box or like a single text entering concept. You would have a body and so on, but these would not just iWeb elements, not just HTML elements, but these were just representations of the concept that you can automate. And of course, each concept has its own interaction. So for example, a multi-line text entering concept has a fill-in with method. This is how you can fill in multiple lines of text to it. Okay. And the good thing is that whenever you change the implementation of this concept, so maybe you are changing your text areas to some other control library stuff, you just need to change it in one place because the expectation for the user remains the same. Unfortunately, the page object factory coming from the Selenium doesn't support properties like that, but it's pretty easy to write such for yourself. So if you're just interested to see a sample code, you will get the slides, so you don't have to write down the URL, but you can get it. You can look into that into this GitHub repository. Good. So finally, the timing issues, and I think all of us have seen such things in the code base, right? So thread sleep and some number, and we all know how this happens. I mean, timing issues are coming from the nature of asynchronous behavior of the web application. I'm not saying that I will be able to solve all of your timing issues, but I just would like to show you a different way of thinking about these timing issues that might help you. And actually, the good news is that we already have the solution for it. You will see it in a second. So let's see a concrete example. So let's try to understand why do we have these timing issues. Let's see it through a concrete example. So let's imagine a concrete scenario like that I'm entering some text. I'm a user. I'm entering some text into this title text box, and I finally post the form. I'm clicking this button. And let's say that a lengthy processing is coming. So the system is working, and suddenly I get a result, and I, as a user, can observe that the result is there. So finally, my question is posted to the website. So this is what we need to automate. How do you automate that? It's pretty simple, right? You are just saying some send keys to the title, clicking the button, and then finally you have a find element where you are observing the result. This is typically how it looks like, right? And this find element is sometimes finds the element, sometimes not, depending on how fast your environment is. So this is typically when the timing issue is happening. Now, so how do we solve this timing issue? We are waiting, right? This is how we typically do that. So let's add some waiting to that. Of course, we can do a thread sleep and an arbitrary number, which would be a kind of a static waiting. But we all know that this is just a temporary solution because there will be always a slower CI environment when this waiting will not be enough. And also, this is slowing down our application in all the cases, even for fast environments. So this is not really good. The other typical approach is that you are applying some kind of it is sometimes called active waiting or busy waiting or active polling, which the different frameworks are providing some waiting infrastructure for that. And it's pretty easy to use. You just make a timeout. So let's say that we are waiting maximum 5 seconds. And basically, the infrastructure is just trying to call this find element regularly until it either finds or it times out, right? So this is how you can implement that. You can also do that in a kind of implicit way. So you can configure Selenium to make a maximum 5 seconds of waiting for every find elements. So basically, it's essentially the same, just you don't have to say it for every time when you have a find element, right? This is a kind of implicit waiting. Okay, so these are the typical solutions for that. And I don't know whether you had much success with these, but actually I had to realize that even though that these are solutions for, so they are solving our problem, but actually they are solving the wrong problem. And so even if you have these, you can just have a quick success for that. So let's just go back to our design board and try to understand what happens here. So actually what we did, we just added some waiting for the find element. So basically we have added some waiting here. However, the reason why we had to wait had nothing to do with the observation. Actually, the reason why we had to wait was somewhere in the posting form. So the post form was a lengthy process, and that's why we had to wait. Right? So it looks like we are waiting at the wrong place. We are waiting at when we want to observe and not when we are actually performing the lengthy action. Okay. So let's think about how our users are using our system. So typically our users are hopefully knowing when the action is done, right? How do they know that? How our users can use our system at all? Probably maybe there is a progress indicator, right? So there is something is spinning, and they know that if the spinning stops spinning, that this means that it's done, right? maybe they just look at the browser icon. If it's having some animation, then and it's still in progress. Or maybe they just say that, okay, if they are looking at seeing already the footer of our page, this means that our processing has been done, right? So this is how our users are solving this problem. They don't have a busy waiting, and they just don't try to find their question at the end of the list continuously. So let's try to apply that. And if we would apply that, then we would say that instead of having the waiting in the find element, we would have a waiting after the click has happened. So we would put the wait somewhere there. But if you think about this, does any of these have anything to do with the ask form? No, these are general things, right? So typically, all of our lengthy forms are indicating the in progress state in the same way, right? Because we have a decent application. But if you think about this from this perspective, this means that this is a special concept that we have in our application. So maybe we should model this. And maybe the solution is that, the concepts that we have mentioned before, that, for example, we have a submit concept, and the submit concept says that this is a concept which is triggering a lengthy background processing, and the result is either a success or a failure, and you see the success in this way, and you see the failure in that way. This is how you can explain it to someone, how such a submit button works. And from this perspective, the important thing is not whether this is a button or not, right? But that this button is submitting a form. This is having a special meaning. So if we would apply that, then actually we could just change it with a button.submit click. And the good thing in that is that if you are automating all of your page submits with this button.submit click, so this special kind of click which is also doing the waiting, then whenever this waiting strategy is changing, somebody is introducing a better progress indicator, whatever, you just need to change it in one place and not in all of the other forms where you are submitting forms. Okay, so this could be a kind of general approach, a different approach to solve these timing issues. But you have to be really careful, because of course, it's always easier to just add one more little more waiting in your find element, but this is a technical debt that you have to pay back at one time. So it really makes sense, especially if you are beginning of building up a test automation infrastructure, to think about that and build up a more detailed strategy. Good. So basically, we have seen these 5 different problems that are typically related to UI automation libraries, and I have just shown you some approaches to that. And as you have seen, all of the approaches were somehow starting from the thinking that that our users are able to use our application, and if they are able to use it, then our automation code base should be also able to automate it. So this is what should be the message, and this is what I would like you to remember, that whenever you have such problem, it's always important to think about how our users are solving this problem and try to apply the same concept, try to apply the same models into your test automation code base. Whenever you call it behavior-driven UI automation or not, I don't care, but this is what you should get to come to finally a successful and happy UI automation. Okay. So this was my message for today, and thank you very much.